Warning: World Weary Podcasts occasionally discusses mature themes and uses colorful language.
Welcome to World Weary, a strange but uplifting podcast hosted by two very strange but uplifting women.
Who can't promise to be uplifting.
But we can promise to be strange.
Yeah.
I'm the American one, Cassiopeia Walker.
And I'm the British one, Violet Star.
This episode's gonna be great. Okay, so this week, what has been making you world weary?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, actually, okay, news update was my hair appointment. They did a great job. It was the best hair experience I think I've had in the UK. Japan was my number one. My hairstylist there was unbeatably great. Did a fab job with my hair in Japan. But no, this was very, very good. So I was very pleased, feel very fresh and ship-shape in that respect. But I've dealt with a lot of customer complaints this week.
Ooh, lovely.
Which, of course, I've made Cassiopeia very aware of in my ranting and venting this week. Mainly I just get angry about the gentrification of the town that we live in and can't believe how pretentious and ridiculous some of the people are. It's just some of the things that I've seen advertised in our town lately.
Oh yeah.
That made me slightly irritated were things like a night school for foraging wild garlic, probably to make into pesto.
She says accusation.
And it's like one of those things where you have to pay for a ticket to join, and it's, it's not going to be like 20p or anything. It's going to be, quite a few pounds, I imagine. I've seen an advert for Make a Stick Doll, and when you see the photos, it was literally a stick with a little bit of fabric wrapped around it and some goggly eyes.
So a South Park character.
Not even really figurine in any way. It was a stick.
What's a South Park character?
It looked like the Pooh from South Park.
Mr. Hanky, but there is one, Mr. Stick. It's literally called Mr.
It is
Stick.
Mr. Stick. Okay, it's like a pooey stick with some vintage buttons attached to it. Just, I get tired of seeing a lot of bored people with a lot of money, but no real talent. People starting up boutiques and small businesses like a hobby, There's a lot of people like that have been irritating me this week. For some reason more than other weeks.
For me, what's been causing me world weariness? Well, I'm an orphan now. I'm just kidding. Gonna cut that. No, I've had a colorful week of hardship and interesting revelations.
It's been an emotional roller coaster.
Emotional roller coaster, but I'm looking forward to a brighter future and focusing on good, positive things rather than bullshit. So, without getting into too much detail, it's just, just imagine a hot mess topped onto a pile of bullshit, and that arrives in a small package at your door, and you just have to clear it away and move on with your day.
Are we meant to be feeling this depressed at such tender ages?
Yeah.
I'm still 26 for a few more days. I'm in my 20s. I shouldn't be worrying about gentrification and foraging night school.
Oh man,
we should be clubbing.
I should be
out drinking and dancing around my handbag in white stilettos.
Yeah. Where's my wine tasting event?
Yeah.
I wasn't, I ain't never been rich. So, this week we are discussing Uncontacted Peoples, which is, I believe, a topic that we came up with on the first day we were coming up with topics, but we sort of put it on the back burner because we weren't really sure we were ready to tackle something like that. There's a lot of baggage and things to unpack, but luckily, even though I chose this episode, you'd think the anthropology person would choose this episode, but I'm just so fascinated by this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a very worthy topic to address, I think, in a podcast that we should all endeavour to learn a lot more about. And yeah, I'm glad you picked it, because me being the person with a degree in anthropology and a master's degree now in cultural heritage studies, which is very much on the border between archaeology and anthropology, I'm still not brave enough to bring up a topic like this for fear that I get something wrong,
And then they just attack
I'm always
you.
paranoid that I'm a complete imposter to this, that I have got absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. I don't ever feel qualified to talk about anthropology, especially in a public sphere. So it's a good thing that you picked it, because you can take the bulk of the responsibility.
Oh yeah, I don't care how ignorant
But
I
then I
am.
get to chip in and be a smart ass throughout the whole thing and correct you.
Well, this is the thing. I want to say at the top of the episode, I don't know nothing. I ain't claiming to know nothing.
I'm going to try and provide a slightly sleepy lesson on anthropology then today.
Yeah, I've got some bullet points I want to go through at the top of the episode before we really get into our stories. So we just want to talk about, defining what an uncontacted people is, or isolated people. In the media, they're often referred to as uncontacted tribes, but the official term should be people.
Yeah, you just call them uncontacted people. I think that's probably the safest word to use.
Yeah. Importantly, these people are isolated by either choice or circumstance. If it's circumstantial, very often it would be because of
their location.
Yeah, their location.
Terrain. So often, if you look at where are the kind of main groups of uncontacted peoples planet right now, it's in very heavily rainforested bits of, South America, Brazil, isolated islands, places that are difficult to get to maybe because it's mountainous. And for those reasons, I think they would be considered circumstantial.
Yeah. Otherwise, by choice, maybe they're afraid. For example, they may want to remain isolated and not contact other communities, perhaps due to violence or war or other factors. They also may fear some kind of attack or a negative outcome from contact with other peoples, especially if they've historically already experienced this. And we're going to get into the problematic elements of the term uncontacted with this episode, especially in regards, I know for a fact my story is riddled with where people might find that a bit contradictory of a term. And that's because it's actually a misnomer. Most of these peoples that have been classified as, quote, uncontacted people, unquote, they've actually had some sort of contact with outside peoples and communities.
Yeah, in most cases.
Yeah.
They've had some level of contact with other communities, with, people who aren't part of their group.
Yeah, and a lot of these peoples, they've also may have had contact, unwanted or otherwise, with loggers. I mean, any sort of miners, forestry industry. They seem to butt heads a lot as I was researching, where it's just it's pretty intense.
It's going to be a big recurring issue, and one of the kind of main dangers that uncontacted peoples face throughout the kind of case studies we're going to talk about.
So yeah, there's also, for example, anthropologists might do flyovers to monitor uncontacted peoples.
Yeah.
There's also examples of, distance monitoring. There's, laws that have been enacted in place and fields of safety around these areas. There's all sorts of things going on. So there is sort of this, you can't avoid the sound of a helicopter flying over to check you, to be honest. And I think we're going to discuss a bit of arguments for and against contact.
That's one of the main things.
Yeah.
The whole deal with this is it's uncontacted people.
Yeah.
And often in the media, or if a lot of people, even some of you guys listening, may have a kind of a feeling towards, well, why don't we just make contact and help people? Why do we have to kind of pull back from that? And
that natural curiosity that we all have.
Yeah, or that need, to try and socialize and meet people. So because there are kind of two kind of equally strong arguments or equally deep arguments for either side, we'll probably have a chat about them now.
Yeah, I want to sort of get all the arguments out of the way so people can make up their own minds as they listen to the stories, you know, because I am certainly not educated or informed enough to say solidly about this. It's not like one of those episodes where I can be like, yeah, that was a ghost, man. I believe it. You know, it's not one of those. It's just like, we'll get all the nerd stuff out of the way.
There's a lot of very, like, ethical considerations. It's a very sensitive topic in many ways, and I think we'd all benefit from hearing about both sides. To these arguments before we go into depth with the case studies, just so we've all got a full background on the matter.
So, you want to go through some of the arguments?
Do you have a particular, before we get into this, Cassie, do you have a particular feeling on
I am so torn.
Contacting the uncontacted?
I am torn because the more I learn about these peoples, the more I find them so interesting. But my personal feeling is that if someone wants contact, they will, whether it's out of necessity, perhaps something's happened to their land or such as the logging stuff. If they want contact, they'll come out. And, you know, that's a very basic human thing. If it's wanted, then it'll happen. And when these things do happen, there's usually, unfortunately in our history, there's been some bad contact. So as far as I go with the Star Trek thing. Never deviate from the Prime Directive. Do not contact them. That's how I initially felt. But I'm still sort of torn in a lot of ways, but I feel like I'm on the no fence against.
Okay, well, let's just very quickly then go through some of the arguments against contacting them. Historically, contacting the uncontacted hasn't worked out well in the long run for the uncontacted people. The spread of illness and diseases that they are not immune to often leads to deaths. It can open them up to outsiders with bad intentions, aka, you know, farmers, illegal logging, foresters. If their location becomes known, then they become more vulnerable to attacks and violence from outside groups. Sometimes uncontacted peoples are more vulnerable to attacks using technology, you know, for example, guns that they don't have. Contact with outsiders can cause permanent change to their way of life, their culture. They have a right to protect or preserve their culture and way of life if they choose to. And they also have a right to be left alone. They have a right to live isolated on their land if that's what they want to do. The arguments for contact, and there are lots of extra considerations here. You know, one of the old arguments was that uncontacted peoples would benefit from contact with the outside, i.e. knowledge, modern technology, medicines. This is problematic because it does hark back to an outdated kind of colonialist assumption that uncontacted people were somehow primitive, which is a very problematic word, and that we, or the West, are advanced and civilized. You know, actually it's like, well, you know, these uncontacted peoples, these kind of societies, they've been getting on fine with their own technology and medicines for thousands of years, thank you very much. There's a reason that they're still surviving. You know, and if we do make contact, we have to consider what impact our gifts, you know, for example, knowledge or technology, will have on their lives. Another outdated notion is that uncontacted people are a kind of time capsule for the human race, and the media will often write things like, their way of life has remained unchanged for thousands of years. Again, this is problematic because it suggests that they are somehow more primitive, which is a bad word, and that there is some kind of technological evolutionary hierarchy amongst humans. You know, fact check, there isn't. That is just something we have invented, and it basically is racism. In fact, there will have been historical change within their culture and their society and their way of life over time, and it's wrong to try and measure that or compare it. These peoples have existed as long as everyone else on the planet. They're not trapped in the past. We also have to think about, are there instances where it is acceptable for us, aka outsiders, organisations, charities, to make contact? Maybe to provide aid following a natural disaster, or violence, or drought, or some kind of epidemic illness outbreak. Are there instances where we should make contact in order to prevent a terrible scenario from occurring? For example, some kind of industry, farmers, etc., encroaching on the land that these people live on, violence or sickness occurring from that contact. Do we take the approach of wildlife TV producers and not intervene, let nature run its course? Or do we have a duty as fellow humans to step in? And this goes back to the issue of, who gets there first? Is it the lesser of two evils for a trained authority to make contact rather than people with bad intentions? If contact is made, the popular consensus is that it should be carried out and organised by people who are following a well-researched and well-prepared code of best practice, who have got the best interests of the uncontacted people in mind, not religious missionaries, for example. And if we put our anthropology hat on, we have to be careful about what we, as the outsiders, think is in the best interests of uncontacted peoples.
Yeah.
Because in an ideal world, that should be a decision for those people themselves. Should we make efforts to keep an uncontacted community isolated and protected? Is that really an attempt to just preserve them or freeze them and their culture? Because that's what we like the idea of.
Ooh.
They might want to make contact, they might want to eat McDonald's and drive cars and move to cities and not continue to be, what are perceived as humble or modest people that live amongst nature. You should look up The Noble Savage if you want to read more about that kind of concept. And that it links very much to this kind of problematic notion from the 60s to kind of the 90s, when things like tribes, hunter-gatherer communities and uncontacted peoples were painted by, the West and celebs like Sting and Bono from U2.
Yeah.
As being like pure innocent eco-warriors that had this like environmental agenda and were naturally closer to nature and just want to be living their simple tribal life in the wild. They don't want cars and McDonald's. When the truth is that, they've got just as much right to McDonald's and to change their culture if they want to, or if that's just what happens as a result of their choices. Is it all right for us to have McDonald's and sports cars and factories? Who are we to deny, these people access to those things if they want them?
Yeah.
So this topic really gets us to think.
It's just like, what is the trick? How it's like a catch-22. How do we know what they want and get what they want without contact necessarily? So that's a really good argument for it, because you have to be able to communicate. And some of these peoples have extraordinary evolved languages. But yeah, there's a lot you can go into. We just wanted to make sure you guys had a sort of rough idea of where we're coming from, as far as when we tell these stories, we're coming from an angle of
informedness.
Slight informedness. Slight. Not me, but I've tried my best with the time I was given, is what she says. So today my story is going to be about the Sentinelese, specifically North Sentinel Island, really, which is outside of, it's part of India. So that's why it's extra fascinating. In the heart of Southeast Asia lies the ancient Andaman peoples. They have been described as looking similar to African pygmy peoples. Dr. Erica Hegelberg, who's a biochemist, extracted some seemingly useless Andaman hair samples that had been kept and collected, and she discovered something fantastic. Could the Andaman Islanders be the origin of the human species? So basically, this doctor got all excited. It's in the 90s. Dr. Erica Hegelberg about this. So throughout history, people have been stealing and collecting other people's stuff in the name of like science and that. So, and I'm not going to get into the problematic elements of how much stuff we have stolen, but yeah, the Andaman hair samples have been sitting around collecting dust, and a lot of the items in the museums are just not even cataloged. So she was lucky that they cataloged these. And after cataloging loads of DNA sequences, it was clear that the Andaman were very ancient. And it confirmed the general idea that there was this big, well, to her, it confirmed the idea that there was a big emigration out of Africa, and that the Andamanese were part of these original peoples that had left Africa so long ago. So what she wanted to do was analyze the language, but the language is difficult and different to the rest of the frickin' world. It's very complex. And their grammatical patterns are different from Old World Africa, and it suggests a long history of isolation and perhaps represents a linguistic representation of early African languages. This is all based on her she's really harkening in on the out of Africa theory.
Yeah. And this is like very much, she's linking, when she says ancient,
yes,
you know, it's very much linking back to the slightly problematic point we mentioned.
This is yeah. So what I'm going, I will mention the documentary on our diary but this is taken from a documentary. I can't remember what its name is, but I had to include some elements of this. We will get into who the Andamanese actually are and everything, but we're going to see a lot of that stuff we were describing earlier.
This is what I mean, like, you guys are going to have to listen out, because that stuff, those kind of issues, they crop up time and time again. Read the newspapers, you'll see them using that kind of language every time. They haven't got the memo yet.
Yes, and Violet is here to correct everything. So I've written this up based off of a 90s documentary, so there's plenty of rage to go through. Okay, so she decides she wants to try and make contact to get DNA samples. More DNA samples. Why am I saying that like samples? Samples. I don't know what my brain's doing. So the Andaman Islands are obviously Southeast Asia. It's like a group of islands with lots of quote-unquote uncontacted peoples, including the Jaroa, which lived on the western side of the mainland. Then the Onge also lives in one of the islands, I believe. One interesting thing that I thought was really cute, they enjoy prolonged hugging. So all the footage they have of the Onge, they're just constantly hugging the couples. I just thought that was really cute.
That sounds good.
Like, that's like, I want to...
with more hugging.
Yeah, exactly. I just thought that was really nice. They're into PDA. So the Jaroa and the Onge at one point conspired among themselves to mount an attack on a British settlement after many conflicts. So these are a few of the problems throughout history. So they've attacked the British have attacked them, and the Sentinelese live on North Sentinel Island, and that's the most famous one, arguably, is the North Sentinel Island and the Sentinelese, as they refuse to accept gifts in exchange for subservience to the British back in the day. And so they tend to leave people terrified, waiting with bows and arrows and ignoring gifts. The body language they have is to turn their back sitting on their haunches, simulating taking a shit to let them know, to try and be as insulting as possible without words. And the gift pig they had, they slaughtered the pig, buried it, and retreated back into the jungle. And to this day, they fight any contact from the outside of the world. And that's due to some things I'm going to tell you right now. The problem, okay, so the Sentinel Island and all of the Andamanese peoples have had time and time throughout history fuckery happening to them, and we're going to get into it. But it's the South Andaman Island. It was depopulated by disease in 1789 to 1793, within 4 years of the initial British colonial settlement in 1789. This is taken from Wikipedia, people. Epidemics, including pneumonia, measles, and influenza, spread rapidly, as well as alcoholism. And in the 19th century, the measles killed 50% of their population as a whole. So by 1875, they were already perilously close to extinction. Yet attempts to contact, subdue, and co-opt them continued. In 1888, the British government set in place a policy of organized gift-giving that continued in varying forms until well into the 20th century. There is evidence that some sections of the British Indian administration were working deliberately to annihilate the tribes. After the mid-19th century, British established penal colonies on the islands, and increasing numbers of mainland Indian and Karen settlers arrived, encroaching on former territories of the Andamanese. This accelerated the already declining population of the tribes, and many of them succumbed to the British expeditions where they would just come over and try to avenge some killings of shipwrecked sailors. In 1867, Andaman Islands expedition, dozens of the Onge, the couples that hug and stuff, were killed by British naval personnel following the death of those shipwrecked sailors, which resulted in 4 Victoria Crosses for the British soldiers. In the 1940s, the Jarawa were bombed by Japanese forces. So we're going to go into Triloknath Pandit, I'm really sorry about that pronunciation, who's an Indian anthropologist. He was the first professional anthropologist to land on the North Sentinel Island in 1967. Before that, there were a lot of problems. God, it was really depressing to go through all the bad things that had happened to North Sentinel Island. There's a million YouTube videos that are 2 minutes long that say the same thing. That's on Wikipedia and stuff. So, lots of tragedies happened there. I'm not even getting into John Chow and that mess. I'm really sorry about it, but it's way depressing and I'm not getting into it. The Christians probably already hate me by now. I don't need to start a war.
It's a very sensitive and difficult topic to talk about, but we're doing our best.
Yeah. In 1974, a film crew and the anthropologist we mentioned, so he'd been working with that, this is a big life project for him. He does it over 40 years. He tries to contact them and he takes his time. He does the anthropologist thing. But in 1974, a film crew and himself attempted friendly contact by leaving the tethered pigs and pots and pans, etc. at the beach at North Sentinel Island. And one of the islanders shot the film director in the thigh. The following year, European visitors were also repulsed with arrows. So, on 2nd of August 1981, the Hong Kong freighter Primrose grounded on the island reef. Crewmen, which were immobile on the vessel, basically they couldn't leave and they were awaiting rescue. They send out a radio message saying, "Hey, we're stuck here. Do you mind sending some people?" And then a few days later, they have to contact them again saying, "Look, there's 50 men building boats on the other island, looking like they're coming here. We need rescue." Because the Sentinelese were building boats, tiny makeshift boats, to be able to go and slaughter them. Heavy seas kept the islanders away from the ship, luckily, and after a week, the crew were rescued by an Indian Navy helicopter. In 91, the anthropologist made the first known friendly contact. And until 1996, the Jarawa met most visitors with flying arrows, but from time to time they attacked and killed poachers, etc. They also killed workers building in the Andaman Trunk Road, which traverses through their lands.
Wow.
One of the earliest peaceful contacts with the Jarawa occurred in 1996. Settlers found a teenage Jarawa boy named Enmi near Karamtala town. The boy was immobilized with a broken foot. They took Enmi to a hospital where he received good care. Over several weeks, he learned a few words of Hindi before returning to his jungle home. The following year, Jarawa individuals and small groups began appearing along the roadsides and occasionally venturing into settlements to steal food and items. The ATR may have interfered with traditional Jarawa food sources. Nowadays, you can see the Jarawa in weird tours as trucks go through their lands, and the children are at the point, because their lands are so depleted, they're at the side of the roads asking with their hands out, asking for food and stuff. So we're going to briefly mention John Allen Cho. In November 2018, he was killed when he tried to introduce Christianity to the Sentinelese tribe. Basically, he went up there with a Bible one day. He paid a fisherman to illegally take him up there. He got as close as he dared, but they started shooting arrows and one arrow hit the Bible and he swam really fast to the boat, tried again the next day. He wasn't so lucky. There's a lot of aggression here and it can be quite shocking to hear these things. And of course, there are rumors of cannibalism, etc. And it can be quite shocking but to understand the violence, we have to go back to the original first supposed contact with these peoples. I'll include a picture in the name of the dude. I don't have it here because...
But this is the thing, is like we mentioned earlier, a lot of these people, of these peoples, are traumatized by contact that they have had.
Yes.
That there has been violence between groups, and you need to be able to put yourself in the shoes or in the feet of people who have not had experience with the rest of the world as we know it, who do not have the same perspective of life and perspective of the planet that we do.
And who are we to literally say that our way is better? It would be ridiculous, or this or that. You know, it's just weird.
I think we can probably sympathise that there's a level of fear that these uncontacted people feel
Yes.
about encounters with outsiders. It's not safe for them, it frightens them, there is a risk to their lives, a risk to their way of life. They're going to meet, I think it's...
And there might be cultural differences and superstitions involved. In one video of a clip I saw with the anthropologist and one of the young men, I believe this might have actually been a Brazilian expedition that I briefly watched, where the man was smoking and the guy was like, he's breathing fire. I mean, anything you do can have consequences in contact. You really have to see it from that Star Trek level of, you know,
to understand
how do you even unwrap the ethics of it?
Yeah, to understand these people's reactions to things, you really need to try and put yourself in their shoes, try and see the world from a very, very different perspective to the one that we have.
Well, original contact for these people, Westerners came, well, British people came on the island. I believe it was British. I'm gonna look, I'll put that in the diary. We'll put all the extra stuff in the diary. Original contact, a guy came to the island and they couldn't find anyone. The Sentinelese retreated deep into the jungle, but what they found, 6 people. An older couple, too feeble to retreat in the jungle, and their 4 children. And what did they do? They kidnapped all of them, and the old couple quickly were disease-ridden and died, and so afraid were they about the consequences, they then gave the children gifts and trinkets and candies and then dumped them on the island again. That was the original contact. If you want to understand the aggression, we have to go to the original contact. That's what happened. 4 traumatized children came back with fucking trinkets. And if you read this guy's diary later on, he describes them in such a terrible way, an unfair way. It just shows that time period's lack of knowledge and lack of compassion and empathy for other human beings. They don't recognize them as fellow humans. They see them as something lesser, and it's very disturbing how he writes about them when he killed them.
And what's so awful is that still continues. There is a vein of that in the language that people use to talk about these kind of situations and these peoples.
That's why I'm just trying to be as careful as possible, because just like, I'm fascinated, but like, I want there to be respect there. It's just like, I don't know these people, but they share the same world with us. They share the same planet, and, you know, I just don't want to disease them and kill them, like, just by, like, going over there and being, you know, it really shocks me because there are illegal tourism things. We can see with John Chow, we can see that there are people willing to accept money to try and exploit people who are, you know, I don't know whether they're vulnerable people or whether, you know, they have enough food or this or that. I don't know anything about it because they're so reclusive. But clearly they've showed very clear signs of disrespect with their body language. They've disregarded most gifts. There's only been a couple peaceful contact things, and they tend to take the gifts and tell you to fuck off kind of thing, like with their body, you know, they just retreat. Clearly they don't want contact.
They're making a choice. You know, they're clearly showing
they
that
do
they
not
reject contact.
Yes. It's not like other examples. I saw an example where people were forced because of logging to make contact with people and try and establish a language. The people's leader, he came forward and was like, look, these, trying to describe the loggers and stuff, and they sort of moved their whole population away because there's also gang weird cocaine violence and shit, and they can't live in their old place anymore because they were getting slaughtered indiscriminately. And they are like talking about how they have to protect their women. And I was like, yeah, you better fucking protect your women. It's just like, and they showed clips of those people and they were enjoying this is the thing, they out of necessity left, but like, it's a different kettle of fish. But yeah, it's just, with the Andamanese, it's so complex and there's different, peoples there. But it's very clear with the North Sentinelese that at the moment, there's no clear indication other than no. So we have to take their word for it. If they're pretending to shit at you, then maybe they don't want you in their house, kind of thing,
Yeah, leave them alone.
As far as Dr. Erica goes, she managed to get some samples with her buddy and, tried to make some DNA stuff, but I didn't find it that interesting. I'm not that into biochemistry. Sorry, folks who are biochemists. Her quote, "All has been changed by the threat of newcomers in the last 100 years or so." So, yeah. Yeah, there is that road through the Jarawa territory, and people were shot March 1973. Anyone cutting trees, buildings, the Jarawas were cutting off hands or killing people. But now they're just, stand on the road as tourists. So it's just like, I feel like with the North Sentinelese in the particular, we can see their fellow Andamanese people, like the Jarawa, are completely fucked over by unwanted contact. And, their whole peoples were fucked over in a way. And I don't blame them for shooting people. I think at this point, you'd have to be completely bonkers or otherwise incapable of making a good decision with your life if you chose, unless you were a professional anthropologist with that basic, like that best plan you came up with. Like even then, with the North Sentinelese, I think it's best just leave them alone.
I mean, it's just so mind-boggling. It's like, what a moment on the planet that we live in where we've now just got this fringe selection, to put it, of uncontacted people left. I mean, how much longer can we go on with people still remaining uncontacted on the planet? Probably not much longer.
Well, I think Erica said something like it was sad because, progress is progress. We can't stop it. We can't change.
And it sort of seems sort of inevitable that one way or another, someone's gonna, encroach upon these territories, make contact with good or bad intentions.
Pretty fucked. But yeah, that's sort of my general story. I didn't have like a proper beginning, end, middle sort of story. It just had these things that I just wanted to talk about.
It was good. We've got a good background. I'm going to talk about a case study, I suppose, a case that has been in the news quite a bit. So this is one you guys might have seen. I'm going to tell you about the world's loneliest man.
Ooh.
So in 1995, a group of 6 people, which were assumed to be uncontacted people in the Tanaro region of Brazil, heavy rainforest there, it was heavy rainforest anyway, were attacked by local farmers or cattle ranchers. So the majority, there were only 6 of them, so the rest of the group, is thought to have actually been killed in the 1970s and 80s already. These were just like a group of survivors after a road was built nearby, causing a huge rise in demand for land, for farming, etc. So a huge amount of this particular uncontacted people had already died off, and there are only 6 people left. From this massacre of the group by local farmers, 1 man survived. 1 man survived the attack. The rest of his group were murdered.
And that's so fucked up because it's like they know that they don't have birth certificates, they don't have this, no one's going to be looking for them. That's so cruel.
The last of his people, the last survivor of his people, since that time, he has lived alone in fear, always feeling on the run, living in virtual silence, He doesn't have a family or people around him to communicate with, to talk to eat with, to work with. And that's why he's been dubbed, at least by the media, as the world's loneliest man. He's also known as the Hole Indian, or the Man of the Hole, after these ditches or large holes that he has left in this sort of piece of land that he lives on. It is assumed that he kind of traps animals in, or he hides in these holes or shelters in them. So FUNAI, F-U-N-A-I, all in capitals, are Brazil's Indian Affairs Department. So essentially, they're a department that works to kind of almost like an advocacy group for indigenous peoples in Brazil. And they set aside a small patch of rainforest for this man's protection, which is surrounded on all sides by farms and deforested clearings. I think they said he's got about 3,000 or 4,000 hectares now been designated just for this man to survive in. But obviously, all around the outside of it are the cattle ranchers and farmers, the exact people who do not necessarily have his best interests at heart. So the order prevents people from entering the patch of rainforest or endangering the man's life. Some of the ranchers have, obviously had their eye on his land, and in previous years the local cattle ranchers have been known to hire gunmen to go off into the rainforest areas to kill uncontacted peoples living in that region. So if you've seen this story in the news before, you may have seen the photo of him and his shelter. So there's a picture of an abandoned shelter that he'd made.
Oh, okay.
That, he did all single-handedly, deforesting space in the rainforest to garden and to build shelters. And there's a photo taken from a distance of him chopping down a tree. So these were sort of front page news when they were taken, because FUNAI have been monitoring him for years, but they have not made contact.
That's creepy.
Yeah, we're going to get into that because it goes very deep, and the more you think about it, the more just unbelievable and strange it is that this is the world we live in. We don't know this guy's name. We don't know what the name of his people was, or it hasn't been publicised if someone did. We don't know what language he speaks. The world's loneliest man has rejected contact. He shoots arrows at people who are monitoring him. For example, he recently hit a field worker for FUNAI with an arrow. And FUNAI respects this by not interfering, except, to protect him from attack and to stop people from entering the designated area of forest that he lives in. So obviously, this guy lives in fear. His entire group of people have been killed, and he's the last survivor.
And there's creepy people watching him all the time.
But they're also there to protect him, because if they're monitoring him, if they're not protecting this designated...
An atmosphere of paranoia, because they're not contacting him.
It's a very surreal situation. So FUNAI field workers, they need to monitor this man to establish that he's still alive. They need, I think, probably annually or fairly regularly throughout the year, they need to provide proof of his existence in order to renew the restriction order on his patch of land. So last year, they filmed him from a distance chopping wood, and they need to provide this evidence to keep this protection, because the indigenous peoples are afforded territory by the government, and they need to prove that to stop someone else, or businesses, for example, buying up that land. They also investigate his activities, so they'll go to areas in his patch where they're kind of monitoring him, looking at abandoned shelters like the one in that photograph, traps that he's made, his gardening. They'll find things like his carved arrowheads, gourds that he uses for storing water in, dried nuts, resin torches. As well as hunting and trapping, he gardens patches of land in the rainforest to produce food like papayas, pawpaw, cassava, like those potatoy, yammy things, corn. They think he comes out at night to gather fruits and vegetables when they're ripe. Cuts down these clearings to do these activities, to build shelter, to get wood. Probably takes him days because he's doing it all on his own.
Yeah.
last year, the field workers went to check on him and get evidence that he's still alive, and they actually reported that they were pretty pleased and surprised to discover he's in good health, he's doing okay. He's still continuing with all his plantations and hunting. And the director of Survival International, which is an indigenous rights activist organisation, she said that, you know, he's undergone such a violent experience, he sees the world as a very dangerous place. So that's kind of, she sums up there why he is obviously rejecting any contact with anyone. He lives in a world of fear, and it's very surreal to get your head round. Today, farmers, you know, and these cattle ranchers, etc., they still want his land. The Funai monitors actually set up a temporary camp near his patch, and it got ransacked by an armed group who left a threat there as well. You know, so there's people trying to encroach on this man's territory.
It's just so fucked up.
And then I just would finish that story, the very sad story of the world's loneliest man, in that the director of Survival International said, "In a way, we don't need to know anything about him, but he is a symbol of what we are losing, this tremendous human diversity." I mean, for me, this story just makes me feel so surreal and insane to think about this man, and that we monitor him, and that we have to take, you know, people have to take photos. It's like the Truman Show or something, like.
Yeah, and he's not only living the Truman Show, but he's constantly, they're trying to murder him. So if he isn't constantly on his game and aware of everything around him constantly, then he might get killed by one of these peoples. And there are probably, like, as you said, multiple parties who would gladly see him dead.
In essence, this man is like an endangered animal.
Yeah.
You know, he really is. He's monitored, protected on a designated piece of land. It's a very surreal
It's very weird.
existence for a human. Very surreal and very
It's hard
difficult.
to wrap your head around what that would be like.
Incredibly difficult to wrap your head around.
Like, I can't even process what that
Imagine being
like
monitored and being in the media and people talking about you on podcasts
Yeah.
when you have a completely different life and perception of the planet
Yeah.
and way of living.
You're just in the jungle, but anytime you see, like, weird, unusual looking people with crazy clothes on, they try and murder you. When they murdered your whole family.
My favourite thing to do when I think about Uncontacted Peoples is remembering a very famous photograph of a plane flying over a group of uncontacted people in a rainforest, I think it was South America, and they're looking up at the plane as they're taking a photograph.
Wow.
And I want to imagine what it's like for them to look up and see a plane and a guy with a
every
camera.
time I see that photo, I'm just like, how do you interpret that? How the fuck do you interpret that? And what do you make of it? And it would be so scary. The helicopters are loud. Like, I don't care. I'm scared if I'm around a helicopter. It's hard to imagine. It's such a different life and experience. And I worry for these people. Because I don't think anybody, not that anybody, but like, there are very few people with their best interests at heart. It's just fucked.
It's very surreal and very difficult and so complex.
So murky with the ethics and everything, like.
I say the monitoring and stuff is very surreal, but organisations like Funai, you know, they've released some of this footage, some of these pictures, information to the media, partly to create awareness. You know, their budget was slashed the other year, which means, you know, that lots of these peoples that they are trying to protect are at risk. And it's such a complex amount of issues to think about in this and juggle, but very...
It's just such a different life. That's just something I think about every so often. It's just like, what must it be like to be part of one of those isolated groups? What's their culture like? You know, my curiosity is endless with that kind of thing, and what a fantasy it would be to be one of those people that makes contact, and you just see it as a fantasy. But when you look at real footage of modern, sort of semi-modern contact, it's always a hot mess. I saw a clip of someone like trying to sing at a group of people, and then the group of people were immediately telling them how shit singers they were. I'm like, if you're going to sing, make sure you've got Beyonce there to make a good impression. Don't just go, no. Get Beyonce if you're going to put a little effort into your contact, people. Experts.
Yeah, I mean...
Because you don't know what's pleasing to their ear. Every culture is different. Have you heard Chinese opera?
I love Chinese opera.
I fucking love it. But some people, if I put it on, quite literally will leave the room upset with me. Just... But it's sort of, it's just like there's so much to it, like, it's one of those things where it's just...
It's a difficult topic.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic, but it's one that I love talking about.
But it's very worthy, and we all need to learn more about it, and everyone needs a couple of lessons, I think, in social or cultural anthropology, whatever you like to call it. It's definitely, when I studied... So, hold on, let's do a little Violet life story moment here. For those who don't know, I went to university and studied archaeology and anthropology, and then I went on to do a master's in cultural heritage studies, which kind of felt like a mix of both, but with a heritage vein through the middle of it. And studying anthropology, when I first went to university, completely changed my way of thinking. I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made, was to study both archaeology and anthropology.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to get my head round, and I had to really... It completely changed the way I thought. I was a very different person when I came out at the other end of that degree, and really have continued to try and think differently about stuff, and really always be aware of the multitude of different perspectives that humans have, and what it means to be a human, what makes humans tick, and life on this planet.
Yeah. Oh, I'm feeling like a survivor now. Well, that's our episode on the uncontacted peoples of the world. Maybe we'll do a future episode and I won't be so scared.
We'll put there's a lot of articles, this is a very heavy topic, I understand.
Yeah.
So we've just kind of skimmed over stuff, tried to very briefly get out a load of points that we thought were worthy of talking about in this episode, but we'll put tons of articles that you might like to read on the diary page of our website. Click on there, find the episode. There's a list of further reading if you'd like to get really academic and booky about it.
Yeah, and I'll be putting all my little links of the documentaries I just listened to.
Yeah, and those articles will have pictures. I think we will probably put a few pictures on Instagram, but this isn't necessarily so appropriate. And it really depends on your stance on this topic as well. So, if you want to see pictures, you'd definitely be able to find them in the articles.
Exactly.
And we'll come back with something a little bit more lighthearted next week.
Yes.
But we all need a serious, educational, worthy episode now and again. And this really was a very deserving topic. I don't see enough podcasts talking about these kind of things. I don't see enough podcasts talking about social and cultural anthropology. And I hope to teach you all lots more anthropology stuff in later episodes. So you can look forward to that.
Professor Violet, Professor Star.
God, if I became a professor one day, it would purely be
just so you could be a Professor Star.
Yeah,
you need to become Dr. Star.
50% of the reason I would ever want to do a PhD is because I would get to call myself Dr. Star. I don't care what your position is on whether it's cool or not to be called doctor, because, academic people get very contrary about these things, and it comes in and out of fashion, whether it's really acceptable to call yourself doctor. But Dr. Star, It's
How can you not?
It's the burlesque version.
Make sure if you've got an interesting story or a weird thing that happened to you, or perhaps a topic you just want to suggest, make sure to email us over at
worldwearypodcast@gmail.com.
Make sure you give us a visit on either SoundCloud or iTunes or one of the many podcasting things and give us a rating and a 5-star review.
We have got so many social media thingy-mabobs.
Yeah, they all can be found.
So we've catered to pretty much everyone. We've even got a Telegram group.
Yeah, we're going to make a Discord soon.
Maybe we're going to make a Discord soon. I don't know how many things we can handle right now, but we've got so many cool social thingy-mabobs. They're all on the website. There are some very funky buttons on there. Click all those buttons, find places, get the Telegram group going.
Leave us a comment, leave us a review.
Get on Apple Podcasts.
Check out our YouTube.
We're literally on every good podcast dispensary on the internet.
Yeah, make sure you check out our YouTube because we're going to be doing future live streams from the YouTube channel. We might do like a few surprise episodes live that you won't get to see otherwise.
We got lots of plans. Lots of plans.
I kind of want to do a sticker giveaway.
We will eventually. we will give you an update on stickers next time because we might have some very interesting pictures to show you and we can properly explain all the weird things we've been up to.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, guys. It's been really fun, Violet. Thank you for sharing your story.
I hope I've been informative and that you're not all asleep right now on your laptop in my little university lecture hall.
Yeah, in our mansion.
In my Academy for Witches and X-Men.
Where I am like...
Why do I always visualise myself as the one in the wheelchair? The head teacher.
Because you would be the person in charge. That's a fact. It wouldn't matter if I was like let's say we both bought in, you would still be in charge because I can't be trusted. You know what I can be trusted with? Dancing in the backyard in the moonlight. You know?
You'd be the weird art teacher with the fluffy hair and the glasses
Anna Kramarick's
on your head.
I'm going to do music, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do music and gaming, and I'll train young gaming witches.
You'd be the IT teacher that isn't really present mentally during lessons because you're
I'm like
playing on your phone.
Everyone's playing on their phone. I'm like, the one rule of this classroom is you have to be on your device. If I see you off a device during this 40 minutes, you are going straight to Dr. Star.
God, I think I probably do have quite a headmistress vibe.
Oh yeah, sure. But it's good. It's good. It's the same way that I have this weird diva vibe.
Would I have been a governess in a past life?
You would have been a governess, and I would have been one of those maid servants that got knocked up and then subsequently ended up in a convent, and my bastard baby raised somewhere else.
Oh my god.
Thanks for listening, guys. See you soon. Bye.
Goodbye.